There are currently 200 claimants in Europe alone competing for the illustrious title of the original Holy Grail. Stories telling of the relic's final resting place are found everywhere from England and Scotland to Spain, Syria, and even Maryland in the US. There are also numerous conflicting accounts of what the Holy Grail actually was. Was it a vessel, or did the term Holy Grail refer to something far more secret and controversial? But there does appear to be one candidate for the Holy Grail which is taken more seriously than perhaps any other by Grail seekers. Valencia's Santo Cáliz, Holy Chalice. This mysterious vessel still manages to attract pilgrims from all over the world, even today. But what evidence is there that it is the original Holy Grail? To most people, the Holy Grail is a sacred object written about in medieval literature and mentioned in some Christian traditions, and is usually described as the dish, plate, or cup used by Jesus at the Last Supper. It is also said to be the vessel that held the blood of Jesus as he died on the cross and to possess miraculous powers. Consequently, if it were eventually found, the Holy Grail would be the most valuable and extraordinary relic in the history of Christianity. Even as early as 1543, theologian John Calvin was able to describe several of the at least 20 actual vessels throughout Europe claimed by their owners or its stewards to be the actual Holy Grail of legend. The list has expanded somewhat over the last few hundred years. Some of the numerous supposed locations of the Holy Grail include Accokeek, Maryland, US, where it was taken in the early 17th century by a priest with connections to the Knights Templar; the Oak Island Money Pit, Nova Scotia, Canada, where it was hidden by the Knights Templar in the early to mid-1300s; Roslin Chapel, Roslin, Scotland, where it's rumoured the Grail lies in the family crypt under the basement; and underneath Glastonbury Tor, Somerset, England, where it is said to be buried alongside King Arthur. In recent years, 2 locations in Spain have been touted by Grail seekers as having the greatest claims for possession of the Holy Grail. In their 2018 book, The Kings of the Grail, medieval history lecturer Margarita Torres and art historian José Miguel Ortega del Rio claimed that the Holy Grail lies inside the Basilica of San Isidoro in the northern Spanish city of Leon. 2 researchers said that a 3-year investigation led them to their sensational conclusion that the hallowed cup was a jewel-encrusted onyx chalice that has been long known as the Chalice of the Infanta Doña Urraca Zamora, daughter of Ferdinand I of Leon. The pair named 2 recently discovered ancient Egyptian manuscripts as the source of their discovery. According to their version of events, the Leon chalice was stolen from Jerusalem and taken to Cairo by the Fatimid Caliphate. When a famine devastated Egypt in 1504, an emir in the Muslim part of Spain at the time sent food to the Caliphate asking for the chalice in return. The chalice was then given as a peace offering to Fernando, a powerful Christian Spanish king. The other Spanish contender for the original Holy Grails is Valencia's Santo Cáliz, the Holy Chalice. The story behind this relic is that it was left in the house where the Last Supper took place, which belonged to the family of St. Mark the Evangelists. St. Mark later took the Grail to Rome when he went to serve as an interpreter for Sir Peter. In Rome, the vessel was used as a papal chalice, but when the Emperor Valerian began to persecute Christians from 257 onwards, the vessel was sent to Huesca, Spain, as it was no longer safe in Rome. During the Muslim occupation of the Iberic Peninsula from 711 AD to 1492, the Grail was hidden only to re-emerge in various Spanish monasteries and cathedrals when the Muslim rule began to decline. The sacred vessel was in the care of the kings of Spain, who sometimes kept it in their treasuries or palaces, until it was finally presented to Valencia Cathedral in the 15th century, where it has remained ever since. The cup is nestled in a cove in the wall of the chapel, a focal point for the prayers of local parishioners and for the thousands of pilgrims who travel across the world to see it. But it is not this elaborate story that has convinced many Grail seekers that Valencia's Santo Cáliz is the real thing. Although the Holy Chalice is covered in gold and studded with precious jewels, the real Holy Grail part is the cup at the top, carved from a deep red agate. The ornate base, handles and precious stones were added centuries later. The style and craft of the agate cup persuaded Spanish archaeologist Antonio Beltran, who studied the chalice in 1960, to state that it originated somewhere between the 2nd century BC to the 1st century AD, probably from a workshop in the Middle East. However, there has been no official recognition by scholars, or indeed by the Church, that the chalice in Valencia Cathedral is the actual Holy Grail. According to art historian Dr. Ana Mafi Garcia, however, she states in no uncertain terms that the Holy Grail is the Holy Chalice of the Cathedral of Valencia. She also suggests that the Vatican acknowledged the fact, saying, "Since 2015 and continuing every 5 years, the Vatican has acknowledged Valencia as a Jubilee city. All of this is thanks to the lasting tradition of guarding the sacred relic in the cathedral for so many centuries. The chalice in Valencia is the only relic known as the Holy Grail, and the Vatican officially recognizes." But is any of this evidence that the Holy Grail of legend actually existed? If we take all the stories of the sacred relic into account, then it's obvious that the Holy Grail has many forms. In Dan Brown's 2003 novel, The Da Vinci Code, the Grail was not a cup at all, but referred to the womb of Mary Magdalene, who apparently bore Jesus' child. The background to this extreme theory is taken from an earlier work, The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, by Michael Bagent, Richard Lee, and Henry Lincoln, published in 1982. One fact which many Grail hunters seem not to be aware of is that the Grail does not in fact appear anywhere in the Bible. There is the chalice or cup used as the Last Supper, but this is never given any popular importance. In fact, a vessel called the Holy Grail is not mentioned in any ancient text from the entire 1st millennium AD. This would suggest that the story of the Holy Grail does not have a very old Christian origin, although of course it does not rule out a pagan origin. In fact, the Grail did not appear in any literature until 1190, when a poet, Chrétien de Troyes, wrote his heroic poem, The Story of the Grail. This incomplete work was the epic tale of a quest given to Arthur's Knights of the Round Table to find a lost talisman, the Holy Grail, which could restore the chivalry and honor of Arthur's court. What the Grail actually was, however, is never stated. But the main theory of many of the stories of King Arthur and the Grail is in the 1485 publication of Sir Thomas Malory's Le Morte d'Arthur, The Death of Arthur. Crucially, for the tradition of the Holy Grail, Le Morte d'Arthur was the first time that the critical elements were added to the Grail part of the story. It was Malory who defined the Grail unmistakably as a golden chalice and introduced the parts of the story about it having been a cup used by Jesus at the Last Supper and also the vessel used to collect his blood as he died on the cross. Most researchers looking at the evidence provided by these texts would be forgiven for thinking that there's no evidence at all for the Holy Grail at the time of Jesus. The first mention of the supposed sacred vessel is not until almost 1200 years later, when it was used as a fictional plot element in the Arthurian legend. So how could the Holy Grail have been the cup of Christ? In the words of Carlos de Ayala, a medievalist at the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid, the Grail legend is a literary invention of the 12th century with no historical basis. You cannot search for something that does not exist. Arthur Conan Doyle is best known today as the creator of the detective Sherlock Holmes in the late 19th century. However, he was also a Scottish Rite Freemason with a keen interest in mysticism. He famously became involved in the case of the Cottingley Fairies, alleged photos of fairies taken by 2 teenage girls. Some researchers believe that the Sherlock Holmes adventure, The Musgrave Ritual, contains hidden details of a modern search for the Holy Grail and even clues as to where it may still lie hidden today. Arthur Conan Doyle was born on the 22nd of May 1859 in Edinburgh, Scotland, into a prosperous Irish family. His father, Charles Altamont Doyle, a chronic alcoholic, was an artist. His mother, Mary Doyle, had a passion for books and was a fine master storyteller. From an early age, it was obvious that Arthur had a talent for writing stories, and family tradition would have suggested the pursuit of an artistic career. However, he decided to follow a medical path, beginning his training as a doctor at Edinburgh University in 1881. As a young medical student at the University of Edinburgh, Conan Doyle met a number of future authors who were also attending the university, including James Barrie and Robert Louis Stevenson. But it was one of his teachers, Dr. Joseph Bell, who made the deepest impression on him. Bell was a master of observation, logic, deduction and diagnosis, all qualities which were later to be found in the persona of the famous detective Sherlock Holmes. Conan Doyle received his Bachelor of Medicine and Master of Surgery qualifications from Edinburgh in 1881, and as an MD in 1885 upon completing his thesis. During the next few years, Conan Doyle divided his time between establishing a medical practice and struggling to become a recognized author. Conan Doyle's famous literary detective Sherlock Holmes made his first appearance in A Study of Scarlet, a novel-length story published in Beaton's Christmas Annual in 1887. The success of this story encouraged Conan Doyle to write more stories involving the detective and his assistant Dr. Watson, and driven by intense public interest, Conan Doyle continued writing Sherlock Holmes adventures up until 1926. In addition to the Sherlock Holmes stories and novels, Conan Doyle wrote a number of other novels, including The Lost World and various non-fictional works. Later in life, Conan Doyle developed a passion for spiritualism and the occult. While researching the topic of fairies, he became involved in the infamous case of the Cottingley fairies, involving alleged photographs of fairies taken by two teenage girls, Elsie Wright and her cousin Frances Griffiths, in rural Yorkshire in 1917. Photographic experts who were consulted at the time stated that they believed none of the negatives had been tampered with. There was no evidence of double exposures, and that a slight blurring of a fairy in one of the photos indicated that the fairy had been moving during the exposure. When asked to photograph the fairies with witnesses present, the girls said that they could not do it while anyone else was watching. No one else who visited the site was able to photograph the fairies. The only independent witness to the sightings was Geoffrey L. Hodson, a theosophist writer who claimed to see the fairies and confirmed the girls' observations in all details. When Conan Doyle saw the photographs in 1920, he asked his friend Edward Gardiner to visit Cottingley and give each girl a camera, hoping they would manage to capture more images of fairies. Soon afterwards, the girls produced 3 additional prints. It appears, however, that Gardner was far from being an impartial investigator. He wrote to Elsie Wright's mother, asking her to get her little girl to take more photos, and in one of several letters to her he said, "I know quite well that fairies exist and that they are very shy of showing themselves or approaching adults, and it is only when one can obtain the help of their friends that one can hope to obtain photographs and hence lead to a better understanding of nature's ways than is possible otherwise." In the winter of 1920, the popular magazine The Strand, in which many of Sherlock Holmes' stories had appeared for the first time, announced on the cover of their Christmas issues, "Fairies Photographed," an epoch-making event described by A. Conan Doyle. Conan Doyle publicly declared the photos to be genuine and later included them in his 1922 book, The Coming of the Fairies. Doyle believed that if the photographs convince the public of the existence of fairies, then they may more readily accept other psychic phenomena. It was not until decades later, in the early 1980s, that Elsie and Frances finally confessed to having faked the photos with paper cutouts. However, they still maintain that they had seen real fairies in Cottingley in 1917. In a BBC broadcast interview in 1975, Elsie had said cryptically, "I've told you that they're photographs of figments of our imagination, and that's what I'm sticking to." Conan Doyle's book, The Coming of the Fairies, is still in print today, and some people still believe at least some of the photos are authentic. Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes story, The Musgrave Ritual, was first published in the Strand magazine in 1893 and Harper's Weekly on the 13th of May, 1893. In this story, a school friend of Holmes, Reginald Musgrave, explains a problem that he has with his butler, Brunton. The butler had been caught rummaging through the private papers of the family and with a manuscript containing the ancestral ritual of the Musgraves in his hands. However, this ritual is considered meaningless and thus of no value by the Musgraves. A few days later, Brunton and a maid, Rachel Howells, both disappear. The lake of the property is searched, but only a bag containing various apparently useless coins and bent rusting metal objects is found. Holmes later works out that the ritual is a code specifying a certain location. In this place, a hole in the cellar closed by a huge slab, that Holmes and his friend discover Brunton's corpse. Brunton had apparently deciphered the ritual and discovered hidden treasure in the hole, but the maid, his accomplice, had pulled the heavy slab over the hole above him as soon as she had recovered treasure. She then threw the bag in the lake and fled the estate. She had done this in revenge because Brunton had promised to marry her, but had later left her for another woman. The treasures in the bag proved, when cleaned up, to be the gold crown of England, entrusted to the Musgraves after the execution of Charles I in 1649. The crown had been hidden on the Musgrave estate by friends of the deposed and executed King Charles, who were fleeing the parliamentary forces of Oliver Cromwell. The text of the ancient ritual in the story, The Musgrave Ritual, is given by Conan Doyle as: whose was it? His who is gone? Who shall have it? He who will come? Where was the sun? Over the oak. Where is the shadow? Under the elm. How was it stepped? North by 10 and by 10, east by 5 and by 5, south by 2 and by 2, west by 1 and by 1, and so under. What shall we give for it? All that is ours. Why should we give it? For the sake of the trust. The Musgrave family had, in respect to the wishes of their ancestors, unquestioningly passed the mysterious ritual down through the many generations of Musgraves. Over hundreds of years, each head of the family had traditionally taught the ritual to his male offspring. Some researchers believe that Conan Doyle's intense interest in spiritualism and the fact that he was a Scottish Rite Freemason could mean that the writer consciously or subconsciously included the secrets of Grail lore in his story, The Musgrave Ritual. Writer and researcher Sol Aris theorizes that the apparent lack of importance of the treasure in the story is used by Doyle to conceal the fact that the tale concerns an extremely significant link in the British royal succession, the old crown of England itself. Apart from being an important artifact itself, it is also symbolic of the power possessed by its wearer, and more importantly, of the sacred Grail guardianship with which the Stuart line was allegedly entrusted, hence the line, for the sake of the trust in the ritual. The trust was no less than the guardianship of the Holy Grail. According to Aris, the line of Stuart Grail keepers, which was interrupted and ended forever with the beheading of Charles I, the rightful heir. Controversy over the Shakespearean authorship is not new. It has existed ever since the 18th century. For some, Shakespeare's plays must have been written by a more obviously accomplished writer, such as Edward de Vere, the 7th century of Oxford, Sir Francis Bacon, the playwright Christopher Marlowe, Sir Walter Raleigh, John Donne, and even Queen Elizabeth I. But could these plays have been authored jointly by a mysterious group called the Knights of the Helmet? This invisible order, dedicated to Pallas Athene, seems to have started at Gray's Inn, London, with Francis Bacon, the acknowledged leader of an extremely talented group of Rosicrucians and Freemasons. Francis Bacon and the Knights of the Helmet. Francis Bacon, one of the leading figures in natural philosophy and in the field of scientific methodology, was born on the 22nd of January 1561 in London, the son of Sir Nicholas Bacon, keeper of the Great Seal for Elizabeth I. Bacon studied at Cambridge University and at Gray's Inn and became a Member of Parliament in 1584. Bacon's political career prospered, and in 1618 he was appointed Lord Chancellor, the most powerful position in England, and in 1621 he was created Viscount St Albans. However, soon after this, he was charged by Parliament with accepting bribes, which he admitted. He was later fined and imprisoned and then banished from court. Although he was later pardoned, this was the end of Bacon's political life. He retired to his home at Gorhambury in Hertfordshire and died in London on the 9th of April 1626. There are certainly some mysteries surrounding Bacon's life. He's believed by some researchers to have been a member of a number of secret societies, including a Freemasons and German secret philosophical society, the Rosicrucians. Another mysterious organization which Bacon was allegedly a member of was the Knights of the Helmet, an order dedicated to Pallas Athene, who carried a spear and wore a great helmet, a symbol of secrecy. According to Greek myth, anyone who wears the helmet becomes invisible. This society was a gifted group of gentlemen based at Gray's Inn, London, of whom Francis Bacon was the acknowledged leader. Some Baconian scholars believe that the idea behind this group was to create a series of classical literary works which would educate the English people and transform them into a nation that one day would dominate the world. Other researchers take this a step further, claiming that the Knights of the Helmet conceal the fact that Bacon actually was Shakespeare, and that Shakespeare is a synonym for Apollo and Athena. They were both known as Shakers of the Spear, and the spear represents a ray of wisdom. Is it possible that the Shakespeare plays were written as a collective work by the Knights of the Helmet? This would explain why Bacon employed such a large group of writers, poets, code breakers, and other educated people around him. In his 1928 work, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, Canadian author and mystic Manly P. Hall wrote about the mysteries surrounding Bacon and Shakespeare, saying, "The Bacon-Shakespeare controversy involves the most profound aspects of science, religion, and ethics. He who solves its mystery may yet find therein the key to the supposedly lost wisdom of antiquity." Even though most advocates for someone other than Shakespeare having written plays do not take the Knights of the Helmet theory seriously, they still believe that Bacon is the leading contender for their authorship. In the search for the real author of Shakespeare's plays in the late 19th century, American writer Delia Bacon proposed that the author was none other than Sir Francis Bacon, to whom she was not actually related. Her vehement arguments against Shakespeare as the author of the plays eventually reached the ears of a riverboat pilot on the Mississippi, Samuel Clemens, who would later become the most famous writer in the United States, Mark Twain. But it was not until the very end of his career that Twain returned to Delia Bacon's theories. At a dinner at his house in January 1909, Twain's circle of friends proved to themselves that it was possible to find the coded signature Francisco Bacono in a sequence of letters from the first folio of Shakespeare's plays. So, could Francis Bacon have authored the plays? Bacon was born 3 years before Shakespeare and certainly possessed the intellectual ability and knowledge to have written the plays. Shakespeare could not have known the workings of the court, both in England and on the continent, whereas Bacon knew the court extremely well. Well, he was brought up in it. Fortunately, some of Bacon's plays or court entertainments survive. Unfortunately, they're totally lacking in literary ability and artistic style, with stock characters, no grasp of a plot, and a distinct lack of ability to describe characters. In short, these works are about as far away from Shakespeare's plays as it was possible to be at the time. But what of Shakespeare himself? Could he be the author of the Shakespearean plays? William Shakespeare. William Shakespeare was born in 1564 in Stratford-upon-Avon, Warwickshire, England, and died on the 23rd of April 1616 in Stratford-upon-Avon. There is a large amount of factual knowledge about Shakespeare, but unfortunately the majority of it comes from official documents. Documents concerning the great writer include dates of baptisms, marriages, deaths and burials, wills, conveyances, legal processes, and payments by the court. There are also, however, a number of contemporary references to him as a writer. At the age of 18, Shakespeare was married, though where and exactly when are unknown, but there is evidence in the form of a marriage license which was issued for the marriage of William Shakespeare and Anne Hathaway of Stratford. On the 26th of May, 1583, the couple's first child, a daughter named Susanna, was baptized in a Stratford church. On the 2nd of February, 1585, twins were baptized, Hamnet and Judith. Hamnet, Shakespeare's only son, died 11 years later. The great enigma of Shakespeare's life, and one that has led to much controversy, including that over the authorship of his plays, is what happened to him next. The 8 years between the birth of his twins and when his name begins to appear in London theatre records are a complete mystery. Theories as to what happened to Shakespeare during these lost years include that he travelled around England and abroad, worked as a schoolmaster in the country, was a soldier and law clerk, or became a devoted member of the Roman Catholic Church. Many scholars believe that when the London theatres were closed by order of the Privy Council on June 23, 1592, Shakespeare had already been working as an actor and writer on the professional stage in London for 4 or 5 years, which would account for most of the lost time of his life. The authorities closed the theatres as they had been worried about a severe outbreak of the plague and concerned at the possibility of civil unrest due to their decision. When the theatre eventually reopened in June 1594, the theatrical companies had been reorganised, and Shakespeare was a full member of a theatre troupe known as the Lord Chamberlain's Men, who in 1603 became the King's Men. By 1592, Shakespeare was already well known enough as a writer to have been the subject of Robert Greene's attack on what he called the upstart crow in Greene's Groat's Worth of Wit. However, play scripts and their authors were generally given low status in the literary system of the time, and when scripts were published, it was their connection with the theatrical company rather than to the scriptwriter which was publicised. Shakespeare had to wait until 1597 for his name to appear on the title page of his plays Richard II and a revised edition of Romeo and Juliet. One significant piece of evidence that Shakespeare was now enjoying great success as a playwright and was trying to help out his family is the fact that a coat of arms was granted to his father, John Shakespeare, in 1596. Altogether, Shakespeare's complete works include 38 plays, 2 narrative poems, 154 sonnets, and a variety of other poems. No original manuscripts of Shakespeare's plays are known to exist today, though of course some may be held in private collections. It's essentially due to a group of actors from Shakespeare's company that we have about half of his plays today. This group collected them for publication after Shakespeare died, preserving the plays. The writings were later collected together in what is known as the First Folio. Folio refers to the size of the paper used. This contained 36 of his plays, but none of his poetry. The question of whether Shakespeare actually wrote his plays is an extremely controversial one, but it has to be said that readers and theatregoers in Shakespeare's own lifetime, and up until the late 18th century, never questioned Shakespeare's authorship of his plays. He was a well-known actor from Stratford who performed in London's leading acting company, among the great actors of the day. Shakespeare was also widely known by leading writers of the time, including Ben Jonson and John Webster, both of whom admired him as a dramatist. Many other tributes to him as an extremely talented writer appeared during his lifetime. Consequently, any theory that suggests that he was not the writer of the plays and poems attributed to him must assume that Shakespeare's contemporaries were universally fooled by some type of secret arrangement, a huge literary hoax, which is surely an absurd idea. The Hagia Sophia in Istanbul has a very long history. It has survived earthquakes, religious power struggles, and has been a church, a mosque, and is now a museum. It is known as the Hagia Sophia in Turkish and was dedicated to the wisdom of God, the Logos. There were once 2 more churches that were regarded as churches of divine wisdom, but the Hagia Sophia is the last that remains. The ancient monument is also called Sancta Sophia, but this name is not associated with Saint Sophia, as many mistakenly believe. Rather, its name makes reference to its association with divine wisdom, because Sophia means wisdom in Greek. From the time of its construction between 532 and 537 AD, on the orders of Byzantine Emperor Justinian I through to 1453 AD, the Hagia Sophia served as a cathedral for the Eastern Orthodox Church. However, Constantinople, as Istanbul was once called, was conquered by the Ottoman Turks at this time, and the Hagia Sophia was converted into a mosque by order of Sultan Mehmed II. It remained in use as a mosque until as recently as 1931, when it was closed down for 4 years to be reopened as a museum in 1935 by the first president of Turkey, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. Claimed by Marley Simmons, writing in the New York Times, to have changed the history of architecture, the Hagia Sophia has a truly magnificent dome and was the largest cathedral in the world for thousands of years, and it held this distinction until St. Peter's Basilica in Rome was completed. The Hagia Sophia has provided the architectural inspiration for the Blue Mosque and the Sultan Ahmed Mosque, amongst other buildings. Built over a fault line, the Hagia Sophia has been badly damaged by several earthquakes and has had to have been repaired many times. Quakes in August 553 AD and in December 557 AD caused cracks in the main dome. Then another earthquake in May 558 AD totally collapsed the dome, as well as destroying other parts of the church, including the altar. Further damage was caused by quakes in January 869 AD and again in October 989 AD. A very great earthquake in Istanbul in 1894 also destroyed parts of the church. A well in the center of the main hall is said to have the power of curing heart disease and other illnesses. Sufferers must visit the well 3 times in a row on Saturdays and drink a glass of its water each time. This tradition lasted up until it was opened as a public museum. The Hagia Sophia also has a mysterious perspiring column, weeping column or wishing column, made of marble that stays moist even in the heat of summer. It is believed that this column also has the power to cure illness. The column has bronze plates on the lower section and a hole in the middle of one of these, and the faithful who seek healing put their thumbs or fingers in the hole, then rub the affected area of their bodies. It is said Emperor Justinian once cured a terrible headache by merely leaning on this column. The moistness is said to be the tears of the Virgin Mary. Another legend says that the dampness began after Sir Gregory the miracle worker appeared there in 1200. The Hagia Sophia has several Christian mosaics. One of these is known as the Desis mosaic, which was created in 1264 AD, is of particular interest because it's been said that an image of Jesus is not of Christ, but Apollonius of Tyana. The late American researcher Robertino Solarian promoted the controversial theory that Apollonius was a philosopher who became the model for Jesus Christ, who was actually a fictional character invented by the Church Fathers. However, the main evidence we have for the beliefs about Apollonius is contained in the writings of Philostratus the Elder. There are mosaics of seraphim and pendentives supporting the dome, but these have remained hidden for 160 years because they were covered by layers of plaster. When the Hagia Sophia was converted into a mosque, the mosaics were hidden due to a ban on representational images by the Muslim religion. Although the exact age of these mosaics is unclear, they are known to have been created more than 700 years ago. The Hagia Sophia has had many holy relics housed within it in the course of its history, though these were removed when the church was ransacked at the time of the Fourth Crusade. Relics have included nails from the True Cross, the shroud of the Virgin Mary, and the tombstone of Jesus. The wood from which the door known as the Emperor Door is made is believed to have been taken from Noah's Ark. In support of this, it is known that Emperor Heraclius went in search of the Ark in the 7th century. Best-selling author Dan Brown, who wrote the Da Vinci Code, made reference to the Hagia Sophia in his latest novel entitled Inferno. Information like this has made the Hagia Sophia a place that countless tourists wish to visit, and these people, of course, need accommodation if staying in Turkey. There are plenty of hotels available in Istanbul and guided tours of the Hagia Sophia. A big mystery is the question of what lies below the Hagia Sophia. Are there any crypts, cellars and underground tunnels that are being kept hidden from the public? And if there are none, why is it then when it was common for such underground structures to be built under churches? Crime and mystery writer L.P. O'Brien has looked into this in depth in his blog article, What Secrets Are Hidden Under Hagia Sophia. Now, a team of British and Czech-led researchers have uncovered and mapped the ancient subterranean realms of Hagia Sophia. For over 10 years, archaeologists have been tunneling into the subterranean world beneath Hagia Sophia, which for almost 1,000 years was the largest conventional building in the world. The size and functionality of the original 6th century AD cathedral that first stood upon the site where Hagia Sophia now stands has always been a mystery. However, according to an article in The Independent, more than a kilometre of long-lost tunnels and subterranean chambers were discovered underneath the superstructure of religious worship. Hagia Sophia was allegedly built as a vast cathedral by the late Roman, early Byzantine Emperor Justinian the Great in 537 AD, after an angel from heaven showed him the sacred design in a vision. According to the Hagia Sophia website, for 900 years, the site was a center of Orthodox Christianity until 1453 AD, when the city was invaded by the Ottomans. After the conquest of the Muslims on the 29th of May 1453 AD, following a 53-day-long siege, for the last 500 years, the sacred site has been a principal religious site in the Muslim world, serving as the Grand Mosque of the Sultans. In 1935 AD, Hagia Sophia was repurposed into a museum of the Turkish Republic. The new discoveries at Hagia Sophia by the British and Czech archaeological team have revealed that Emperor Justinian built his great cathedral as the central feature of a much larger complex with at least 5 significant religious buildings. These 5 buildings were Justinian's Grand Palace, where the Patriarch of Constantinople resided; the Great Baptistery, the site of the baptism of Emperor Justinian and his family; the Patriarchal Council Chamber, which issued some of Christianity's most important theological and other decisions, including, according to The Independent, the historically very significant decision to increase the religious status of the Virgin Mary; and the Great Library of the Patriarchs, which is associated with the Patriarchal Council Chamber. The investigation also revealed that Justinian had clad his cathedral in blinding white marble, so that it would shine and shimmer over the imperial capital, an effect which the author says represented purity in both Roman and Greek traditions, reflecting the ideology of a biblical heaven. Mr. Dark writes in his new book that the series of excavations have for the first time established how secular imperial power was actually integrated into Hagia Sophia's spiritual rituals. For example, a purple porphyry disc measuring 59 centimeters, 23.22 inches in diameter, was discovered where Emperor Justinian and his successors stood during religious services, and similar imperial purple discs were discovered at key locations across the cathedral. They are thought to mark the routes walked by patriarch emperors during rituals. The new book also reveals that these discs were created with magnificent purple porphyry that was imported from an imperially owned quarry in Egypt. The Romans built an extensive network of tunnels and chambers underneath the cathedral, and because most are now filled with water, a team of Turkish divers explored these caverns and estimated that more than 1,000 meters of tunnels and unexplored hidden rooms lie beneath Hagia Sophia, comprising water cisterns and underground chapels and burial areas. And maybe, once the lockdowns ease later this year, these hidden aspects will finally be exposed, revealing more of Hagia Sophia's secrets. The presence of mysterious graffiti, possibly made by the Knights Templar in a fortified town in southwestern France and at various locations in England, has prompted an investigation into their possible meanings. The mystical graffiti at Dom Prison Castle, which includes strange depictions of the Holy Grail, was of similar design to alleged Templar images carved into the walls of the mysterious site of Royston Caves in England, though the authorship of the carvings at both sites has been hotly disputed. The end of the Knights Templar. After the defeat of Knights Templar forces in the Holy Land in 1291, the Christian hold on the Holy Land effectively ended. With the Crusades over and the Dome Holy Land lost, many also began to question what purpose the Knights Templars served now that the reason for their existence was gone. The wealth and power enjoyed by the order, with its exemption from taxes and huge landholdings throughout Europe, had made them many, often dangerous enemies. In the end, this was to be their undoing. On a Friday in October 1307, King Philip IV, the Fair of France, had all the Templars he could find in the country simultaneously arrested and imprisoned. Philip also seized all the knights' property and possessions, accusing the order en masse with a variety of heretical crimes, including spitting and trampling on the cross, homosexuality, and worshipping of an idol. A number of the Templars were subsequently tortured by inquisitors until the required confessions were extracted and were then executed. It's highly unlikely that confessions obtained under such conditions had any basis in fact. In 1314, the remaining Templar leaders, including the last Grand Master Jacques de Molay, were burnt at the stake in front of Notre Dame Cathedral on the Île de la Cité, an island in the River Seine. Apparently, before becoming enveloped by the flames, de Molay is said to have prophesied that Philip IV and his co-conspirator Pope Clement V would be dead within the year. Whether this happened or not, it is true that both men died within a year of the Grand Master's execution. With the death of de Molay, ended the turbulent 200-year existence of the Knights Templar. This, at any rate, is the conventional story. Other European monarchs remained unconvinced of the Templars' guilt, even after Pope Clement V, under the influence of Philip, had officially disbanded the order in 1312. In England, though, many knights were arrested and tried. The majority were found not guilty. Some escaped to Scotland at the time under the control of the excommunicated Robert the Bruce, and therefore unaffected by the papal bull outlawing the order. The sudden end of the Knights Templar and the apparently complete disappearance of the order and its assets has fueled a large amount of legend and extreme theories involving the Knights. While it is true that the Templars were partly absorbed into other orders, it is not clear what became of the estimated 15,000 Templar houses, their fleet of ships, their vast archive detailing their business holdings and financial transactions, and the Templars themselves. There were tens of thousands of Templars across Europe, only a small proportion of which were tortured and executed. What happened to them all? In England, the county of Hertfordshire allegedly became a sanctuary for fugitive knights from all over Europe. The town of Baldock in Hertfordshire was founded by the Templars, and from 1199 to 1254 it had been the order's English headquarters. It's certainly plausible that after the official censure of the orders of the Templars continued as normal, but meeting in secret hidden rooms, cellars and caves. The graffiti at Dom Prison Castle. Dom is a commune located 820 feet above sea level on a rocky outcrop overlooking the Dordogne River, in the Dordogne department of southwestern France. Dom is a fortified medieval town founded in 1281 by Philip III, known as Philip the Bold, King of France from 1270 until his death in 1285. In the early 14th century, many Knight Templars were imprisoned in Dom during the trial against them. Testimony to this imprisonment is Templar graffiti inscribed on the walls of the Tower Gate, the building where they were held between 1307 and 1318. For some Templar researchers, these graffiti carvings are a unique insight into the innermost thoughts and beliefs of the order. One of the Templar inscriptions on the wall reads 1307, the date when the Order of the Knights Templar was officially dissolved by the decrees of Pope Clement V. Many of the carvings employ a code that the Templars used to represent both themselves and their fate. So, for example, an octagon meant the Holy Grail, a square, the Temple on the Mount, a circle around this square meant imprisonment, and a triangle with a cross on top was to represent Calvary, where Christ was crucified. There are also more abstract signs and symbols of less clear meaning, and recently researchers have discovered other inscriptions that were invisible to the naked eye. Unfortunately, these carvings have not been published. Royston Caves. For some researchers into the Knights Templar, Royston Cave in Hertfordshire, located at the crossing of two Roman roads, the Icknield Way and Ermine Street, was once a Templar meeting place. The cave has a number of medieval carvings on the wall, many of them pagan, but also figures thought to be St. Catherine, St. Lawrence and St. Christopher, saints known to be revered by the Templars. Support for the theory that it was used by the Templars comes in the form of the similar carvings not only at Dom, but also at the Tour de Caudray in Chinon, France, where in 1307 Templar knights were imprisoned before their execution. It has even been postulated that one of the carvings at Royston represents the burning at the stake of the Grand Master of the Order, Jacques de Molay. Former custodian of Royston Cave, Peter Holdcroft, author of the 1998 book, A Pictorial Guide to the Royston Cave, takes the place's connection even further than the Knights Templar, bringing in the Holy Grail and the Illuminati, though based on what evidence is not clear. Although the possibility of the Knights Templar using Royston Cave as a place of refuge is not unfeasible, it has to be borne in mind that the bloodthirsty persecution of the order in France did not extend to England. This is one reason why between October 1307 and January 1308 many Templars fled to the country for safety. Though a few Templars were arrested in England, and there was a trial that took place from the 22nd of October 1309 until the 18th of March 1310, most remained free to find another place in society after the dissolution of their order. Despite the romantic appeal of the idea of the Templars meeting secretly at Royston, in light of the situation in England at the time, it seems unlikely that the order would have found it necessary for clandestine subterranean meetings in places such as Royston Cave. The most probable explanation for the use of Royston Cave is decidedly more prosaic. The late 13th century castle at Sloop in the Liberec region of the Czech Republic, there is a chamber in the castle that seems to have been used as a prison, and later in the 17th century as a hermitage. Carvings illustrating religious themes have been discovered on the walls there. Taking the discoveries at Sloop with similar examples from Carlisle Castle in the north of England, which date from the 1480s, long after the Knights Templar, it's a distinct possibility that Royston Cave was used as a prison at some stage in its history. There is documentary evidence that Royston Cave was almost certainly being used as a hermitage in the late 15th, early 16th century, which would suggest that it probably originated as a hermitage, probably for use by anchorites from nearby 12th century Augustinian priory, and was later converted into a prison. However, a number of the carvings at the cave remain enigmatic and may not be linked to the cave's use as a hermitage or prison. One of these carvings is the so-called Sheila Nagig, a figurative stone carving of a naked woman, sometimes found in churches and castles from the 11th to the 13th centuries, particularly in Britain and Ireland, but also in France, Spain and Norway. But what was one doing at Royston Cave? Some researchers believe that the only explanation is that this example of Sheila Nagig may in fact be a pagan Celtic survival, which would put the beginnings of the cave back hundreds of years, perhaps even into the pre-Roman Iron Age, more than 2,000 years ago. Bearing in mind the uniqueness and importance of the Royston Cave, one wonders what fascinating discoveries would result from a full investigation into its carvings and the excavation on the cave floor. Mysterious ancient round towers are found all over the world, but the vast majority are found in Ireland and are thought to be Christian-era buildings. though some researchers believe they have a much older and far more mysterious origin. An interesting news story is that these Irish towers and others like them scattered throughout the world formed a global network built to utilize the Earth's electromagnetic energy. There are 65 ancient round towers distributed with apparent randomness across Ireland in all but 4 of the 32 counties. Some examples are as high as 112 feet above the ground, whilst others are mere foundations a few feet tall. The structures are entered by a single doorway, usually high above the ground, and are between 5 and 7 65 stories high with small windows. The rooms had wooden floors and were connected by internal ladders all the way up to the top story, where, under a corbelled conical stone roof, at least 4 windows open to the cardinal points. 13 of these mysterious towers have still got conical caps, and it's assumed that all the other towers once had similar caps that have been destroyed or collapsed over the centuries. Battlements have been built on top of a few of the towers, but it's not known if these battlements were original or added at a later date in the Middle Ages. The methods used in construction of the towers was the same with all examples. 2 walls of block and mortar construction were built a few feet apart from one another, and the space between was filled in with a core of rock rubble. Interestingly, this was a standard method of wall construction used by the Romans. Some researchers believe that this is an indication that the towers are much older than previously thought, and are not Christian structures at all, but are Roman or pre-Roman in origin. However, most researchers believe that Christian missionaries learned the construction technique in England or perhaps continental Europe and then brought it to Ireland, incorporating it in the building of the huge round towers. There is certainly an air of mystery around the Towers of Ireland. That is partly due to the fact that the origins of the structures remains largely unknown. There are stories that they were copied from the similar towers of Ravenna on the Italian Adriatic, which themselves may have had their origins in the minarets of Eastern Europe and North Africa, which in turn had evolved from primitive lighthouses. The Irish artist Hector MacDonald, who was also an historian and an archaeologist, believes that the origin of Irish round towers is indeed in the architecture of Ravenna. They were built in emulation of the very first bell towers of Europe, which were erected in Ravenna in the 9th century, and they in turn were inspired by the erection of the very first true minarets, which appeared on the North African coast after the Islamic conquests of that area. It's a remarkable example of the cross-cultural spread of simple but very important ideas. The imposition of timekeeping for worship in both Islamic and Christian communities through the broadcasting of the religious hours from high towers. Effectively, this is the beginning of the standardization of timekeeping, which has remained ever since an important issue in all societies. We are therefore looking at monuments to something of extreme importance in the development of modern thought and science when we look at our round towers. Despite such opinions, the date of construction of Irish round towers is still a mystery. Historians have proposed that the most likely construction period was between the 7th and 10th centuries AD, based on the fact that the vast majority of towers are located at the site of a known Celtic church dating from the 5th to the 12th century. When they were first constructed, each tower was a freestanding structure, but in later times other buildings, primarily churches and monastic foundations, were built around them. Irish round towers have been variously thought to have functioned as fire temples, giant sundials, astronomical observatories, Buddhist temples, phallic fertility symbols, and ritual druidic buildings. The last explanation, though, is no evidence for it, is perhaps not so far-fetched. It's known that many early Christian Irish priests had been Druids before they were converted to Christianity. The version of Christianity in Ireland before the missionaries arrived from the Roman Church may well have had a Druid, perhaps Gnostic flavour. Another theory for the towers involves the Knights Templar, who are known to have built round towers. This hypothesis suggests that an enigmatic druidical sect of stonemasons was responsible for the Irish towers, and that they later went on to become the Knights Templar, who built cathedrals, castles and round towers in the same way. Needless to say, there is no proof either way for this theory. One function of the towers is known for sure. At some stage in their history, they were used as belfries. Historical records usually label each tower as a bell house. Some researchers also believe that they were also used for defensive purposes, especially during Viking raids on monasteries and churches. However, there are important arguments against this. The first is that a number of the towers appear to post-date the Viking-era times, and the second that they would have been essentially death traps in times of attack, though they may have been used for temporary refuge during surprise raids. Many towers had a religious function and were to become symbols of prestige, power and wealth of the ecclesiastical community and their patrons. Some were used as the treasure houses of the religious orders, with a doorway or large second-floor window permitting the display of holy relics. Other round towers may have acted as scriptoria, a place where monks wrote, copied and illuminated manuscripts, though the limited light from the small windows would surely have been a problem if this was their primary function. In his book, Ancient Mysteries, Modern Visions and Nature's Silent Music, American scientist and writer Philip Callahan puts forward the idea that the round towers were designed, constructed, and used as huge resonance systems for collecting and storing meter-long wavelengths of magnetic and electromagnetic energy originating in the earth and skies. Callahan believes the round towers have metaphysical properties, as the majority were constructed using paramagnetic stone such as mica, schist, sandstone and limestone. Apparently, paramagnetic stone resonates positively in a magnetic field and helps to energize its environment. Callahan suggests that Irish round towers and similarly shaped religious structures throughout the ancient world functioned as man-made antennae which collected subtle magnetic radiation from the sun and passed it on to the monks meditating in the tower and plants growing around the tower's base. The towers could function in this way due to their design and also because of their materials used in the construction. Of the 65 known examples of Irish round towers, 25 were built of limestone, 13 of iron-rich red sandstone, and the remainder of basalt, clay slate or granite. According to Callahan, all of these are minerals which have paramagnetic properties and so can function as magnetic antennae and energy conductors. Callahan further adds that the infilling of various parts of the towers with rubble was not random, but rather might have been a way of tuning the tower antenna to enable it to more accurately resonate with various cosmic frequencies. Callahan also compared Irish round towers with the pyramids of Egypt, reasoning that both the pyramids and the cone-shaped towers are energetically equivalent as they both generate a spin field from the apex. As with some Egyptian pyramids, like the Great Pyramid of Giza, most round towers have lost their original cap or capstone, and both round towers and pyramids have their entrances at a distance above ground level. Intriguingly, Callahan has demonstrated to his own satisfaction that the apparent random geographical distributions of the round towers around the Irish countryside actually reflect the positions of the stars in the northern sky at the time of the winter solstice. Some researchers now believe that the ancient Irish, like the Egyptians, the Mayans and many other ancient cultures, understood the existence of an energetic resonance between specific terrestrial locations and various celestial bodies. Although a detailed knowledge of the stars may not nowadays be viewed as a Christian pursuit, the early Celtic Church did have advanced mystical knowledge, probably in part learned from Irish Druids. While Callahan's theories are almost impossible to prove or disprove, it is a fact that archaeological excavations at the bases of many of the towers uncovered have revealed that many of them were erected over the site of much older graves. Furthermore, many of the tower sites were built on sites considered sacred places long before the arrival of Christianity in Ireland, many of them of Druidical origin. Perhaps the secret of the Irish round towers lies not in the buildings themselves, but in the places that they were built.